Ghostbusters 2 begins 5 years later after the events of the first film. Of course, the Ghostbusters have been sued by everybody in the state of New York after being heroes of defeating Gozer the Gazarian. Dana, who's recently married and divorced, now has an 8-month-old son, Oscar. As for the rest of the Ghostbusters, they have been disbanded since after losing their business. Oh, by the way, Dana no longer lives at 55 Central Park West. She lives in a smaller apartment, plus she has a new job as a restorer at the art museum. We'll get to that later. Anyway, just moments ago, Dana had ran over something that's in the crack of the sidewalk that causes the baby buggy to be possessed and stopped in the middle of the street. Well, good news, Oscar's fine. Ray and Winston, meanwhile, well, since the business is going so slow lately, they are now children's entertainers. Ray now owns the occult bookstore. We'll get to that later. Anyway, they were busy throwing birthday parties for children who don't even remember who they are anymore. Well, after the entertainment business didn't work so well, and then Winston just let slip to Ray, the reason why there are no longer Ghostbusters is because he said because of the property damage that they were a cause of because of their battle with Gozer for 5 years, as we learned in the last movie. And of course, on top of that, they became an unwelcome crowd, which, in other words, they were followed by a restraining order that forbids them from any practices of ghostbusting. That's why they went out of business. So back with Dana, she went to see Egon, who now works at the Research Institute. Then she explains her case to say she ran over something earlier, and that causes the baby buggy to go wacko, and it stops suddenly in the middle of the street, and everybody's seen it, including her. Of course, Dana had assured Egon that she's not imagining this. Of course, Egon agrees. Plus, he also suggested to have himself and Ray had the buggy checked out. And of course, Dana has only one simple favor to not mention this to Peter about it, in which Egon agrees. And the reason why she has Egon do this favor to not mention it to Peter is because, well, after 5 years of dating, they broke up, Peter and Dana, and they didn't really part very well. Of course, as I mentioned before, she'd been married and divorced, and she's been trying to get in touch with Peter, so she wanted to know from Egon how he's been lately. Well, Egon just told Dana that he's doing fine, speaking of which, and of course he agreed to do this favor for Dana. Oh, and speaking of Peter, he has his own TV show called World of the Sidekick. So long story short, after the show ended, that's when Peter meets up with Lenny, who's the mayor of New York. Yes, you're right, the same mayor from the first movie. And of course, he meets up with Jack, who's the mayor's assistant. And of course, Jack just told Peter that the mayor's going to be becoming governor soon and told him and his publicity hound friends to stay away from him. So meanwhile, the art museum, and yes, it's true, just like what the first movie did, it still takes place in New York. Anyway, there's Dana, and as I mentioned before, she has a job there restoring art. And since Oscar's getting older now, this is Dr. Jonas Poha. He's the art director there, and she just told him that she's planning to get back to the orchestra soon, since now her son's getting older. Oh, by the way, just moments ago, Jonas just took out a new painting from his storage, but we'll get back to that later. So meanwhile, at the Ray's Occult bookstore, like I said, Ray is the one that owns the place. Anyway, when Peter arrives moments later, he meets up with Ray and Egon, who are also there. Of course, Ray cannot buy Peter lunch because he says he's working on something right now. But the good news is that Peter just has his book coming in. Well, at first, Ray refused to give away a name to Peter because it's a secret. But then Ray had to let slip in front of Peter is a favor from his former girlfriend, Dana Barrett. So meanwhile, at Dana's new apartment, that's when she answered the door. It was Ray, Peter, and Egon. They not only said hello to Dana, although Peter was very happy to see Dana again. Well, anyway, Egon and Ray didn't hesitate to examine Oscar while Peter has a chat with Dana. Although I did mention earlier that we got a confirmation that Dana's former husband just got a job in the London Orchestra and he took it and ditched her without even explaining why. Then, long story short, although it is true that Peter and Dana should have gotten married but didn't, and the reason why, according to Dana, what she says in her case, whenever she mentions it, Peter just falls asleep. That's one of the reasons why they broke up. So, Ray and Egon, long story short, went ahead to take a look in Oscar's room, while Peter's alone with young Oscar. So, long story short, after that examination with Oscar, that's when the trio went to the street to where the buggy stopped, according to Dana. We saw that in the beginning of the film. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that Dana's new place is on First Avenue, so that's where the Ghostbusters are now. Anyway, back with Egon and Ray, they found something very interesting underneath the street. Luckily for Ray, he's got a PKE, and Egon has a Geiger meter. Now, the Geiger meter is very interesting. I built it sometime just before the Ghostbusters were disbanded. So, long story short, later that night, the Ghostbusters were busy digging First Avenue, though it was never fully explained to Dana earlier what they found. But it's very interesting and pretty weird. So, meanwhile at the museum, you remember Janusz, who's Dana's boss? Well, he doesn't even realize that he was about to be possessed by something or someone in the painting, and we know who that is, other than Vigo the Carpathian himself. Now you're probably wondering what was the favor that Vigo needs from Janusz? Well, to get him a child so that he could be reborn again. So, after that, that's what he did. So meanwhile, back on First Avenue, Ray found something underground, something very interesting, a river of slime, an old transit unit that still exists. Then, long story short, back with Ray, he didn't hesitate to get the sample of the slime. Then, when he tried to get Peter and Egon's attention after talking to the police outside, that's when something tried to grab Ray. So, Peter and Egon got Ray out, but on Ray's way out, he caused a blackout all over New York, including Dana's place. So, meanwhile, at Dana's place, well, luckily for her, she's got some candles, so she went to visit her son in his room. Then she heard a knock on the door to see that her boss Janusz, you remember him from the art museum, he went to see her to see how she is and how her son went, and she told him that everything's fine. The next morning at the New York courthouse, we have Ray, Egon, and Peter are standing before Judge Walker. And of course, Winston wasn't even there that night when they got arrested. Luckily for the trio, they got their attorney. You remember Lewis from the first movie? Well, he'll be representing them. Of course, they're not the only ones. You remember Jack, the mayor's assistant that Peter just met? Well, he's hired a prosecutor to make sure that the trio will go away for a long time, although she said it won't be difficult, with a bunch of charges, of course. So, the trial against the Ghostbusters went on as planned, with the Connet supervisor who was the first witness. Then, of course, Peter went next to speak in his case to tell the prosecutor that when stuff happens, who are you gonna call? So anyway, things didn't look so good for the Ghostbusters. So as the three of them, along with Lewis, stood up in front of Judge Walker, so the judge decides to find them guilty for violating a traditional violation order. So, remember the slime that Ray found underground? Well, it started to twitch for some unknown reason. Maybe it's because of the judge's anger, maybe? Well, anyway, after the slime exploded, and guess what happened? The ghosts of the Celerity brothers appeared out of nowhere. So after Judge Walker hid under the table to where the Ghostbusters were heading, he just let slip the reason why for the Scolarity Brothers' attack is because he once electrocuted them for murder back in the day. So back with Judge Walter, long story short, who begged the Ghostbusters to do something about it, but they wouldn't because Ray just told the judge to talk to Lewis about it. And according to Lewis, he just let slip to Judge Walter that they're still under a violation restraining order. So finally, Judge Walker agrees to have the violation charge removed. So now the Ghostbusters are back in business. So they can capture the Scolarity Brothers' ghosts, which they did. So, yep, thanks to the Ghostbusters capturing the Scolarity Brothers' spirit, so you know what this means. The charges against them are dismissed. And yep, you've heard right. Janine, you remember her from the first movie. She's later rehired. So you've heard right. The Ghostbusters are back in business. And as for Lewis, he's no longer an accountant, so he got himself a new job at a firehouse. And let's not forget Slimer the Ghost from the first movie. He's a permanent resident, as I mentioned before in the first movie. So long story short, meanwhile, back upstairs, it's testing time for the slime that Ray found underground. And of course, we have the negative test first, and then of course the positive, and of course, what better way to do it to use the toaster with it. So they did, and they played Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher on the radio, and the toaster begins to dance with it. Well, you could say that the positive test worked just fine. So meanwhile, back with Peter, he went to visit Daniel at the art museum. So meanwhile there in the restoration apartment, well, Dana doesn't even realize that the picture of Vigo was staring at her. It smiled at her at first, but then when she looked at it, it frowned back down again. Then when Peter showed up to look at her, well, he was very impressed with the restoration of art that Dana's doing. And then he was introduced to Janusz, who's Dana's boss. Well, Janusz didn't hesitate to show Peter the painting of Vigo the Carpathian. Well, in Dana's case, she just told Peter that ever since it came out of storage, she hated it. She despised it. Well, also in Dana's case, the reason why she hated that painting to begin with is because it started to creep her out, and she felt uncomfortable about it. So meanwhile, back at Dana's place on First Avenue, there's Dana in a bathroom about to give Oscar a bath in a bathtub, but something pink came out of the faucet and into the tub, and that causes the tub to attack Dana and Oscar. So meanwhile, in Peter's apartment, it's not that far away from Dana's. I forgot to mention that. So Dana told Peter that something just happened moments ago that attacked her and her baby, but luckily they got out of there. So even though Peter tries to calm them down the best way he knew how, what he did is that he used his telephone to call headquarters to tell Ray what had happened back at Dana's place. And he told them the good news that luckily for Dana and her child, they're at Peter's. So meanwhile, back at headquarters after the phone call ended, Renee told Egon what had happened. Well, good news for Egon. He looked up on Vigo the Carpathian on the computer. Of course, he'll explain it to Peter later. And of course, both Ray and Egon agree that there must be a connection between Vigo and the slime somehow. So, Ray suggested to check at Dana's apartment, while Egon agrees to take a look at the painting the very next day, along with Peter, Ray, and Winston. So back at Peter's apartment, he allows Dana and Oscar to stay with him for a while. So that's interesting. Long story short, the next morning at the art museum, when the Ghostbusters arrived, Ray just told Peter about what he found at Dana's place. Just a bit of pink slime in a bathtub. But there's some good news, because thanks to Egon, who looked up Vigo the Carpathian, told you we'd get back to it later. That's when Egon told Peter about Vigo's ugly history. He was born in the 15th century and died in 1610. According to Ray, Vigo was stabbed, shot, poisoned, and etc. And of course, he was also known as the Carpathian Tyrant. Of course, he's not very popular either in the end. According to Ray, there's a prophecy that said that before Vigo's head died, his last words were, "Time is but a window, death is but a door, I'll be back." So in the museum, the Ghostbusters agreed to examine the picture and everything else in the museum. At first, Jonas told Peter that Dana didn't show up for work that morning. And of course, after that short conversation for a while, Peter was about to take some pictures, which Jonas declines. But after Winston moved Jonas out of the way, Peter went ahead and took some pictures, so he did. So long story short, after the Ghostbusters left the museum, Peter went to his apartment on First Avenue, only to find out it's been cleaned up. And of course, he has a suitcase full of Dana's clothes. So after Dana comes out to meet up with Peter, that's when he told her that there's pink slime in a bathtub, the one that Ray found. So when Dana was asking Peter what should she do about it now, that's when Peter told her that she must get dressed to go out to dinner with him. At first she refused, but then Peter said that he's got a babysitter for Oscar, Janine from his staff at headquarters. So after Dana agrees, but under one condition, if Peter didn't use any cheap moves on her. So meanwhile at Ghostbusters HQ, after a phone call, that's when Janine lets Lewis know that she's closing up for the day. So after Lewis catches up with her, what Lewis wanted to know from Janine if he would go out to eat with her, at first she refused, so she was asking Lewis if she would have him babysit with her at Peter's apartment, and of course he agrees. So meanwhile in the basement, Egon and Ray were busy analyzing the pictures that Peter took back at the museum, the one of Vigo. And what Egon saw was very interesting, and so did Ray, thanks to the magnifying glass, of course. Of course, Ray had seen the river slime before, the one in the picture, because he said that earlier on First Avenue, he saw the exact same thing underground. Then the photos were on fire until, thanks to Winston, he put the fire out. So later that night, meanwhile on First Avenue, when Peter and Dana were about to go out to dinner, that's when three of the Ghostbusters had told them the good news, that they found the river slide behind Beagle's pictures that Peter took earlier at the museum. It's the same one that Ray saw underground on First Avenue. So when Peter looked at Dana and asked her if they should cancel dinner, she didn't say a word. So Peter went off with Dana and they went to the restaurant for dinner. So back with the three Ghostbusters, long story short, they went underground. And that's when Egon and Winston saw the exact same river slime as Ray seen underneath the underground of First Avenue. And of course, Ray's not kidding when he first saw it the first time. So now it's Egon and Winston's turn. When Winston was told to measure how deep it is, that's when by accident Winston went first into the river of slime after he was pulled in, and then Ray and Egon went after him. So meanwhile at the restaurant, when Peter was asking Dana why she'd break up with him, well, according to Dana, what she says in her case, she was protecting herself and that she and Peter were never good enough to each other to begin with. Back at Peter's apartment, Louis and Janine had babysitted Oscar for the night. So back with the Ghostbusters, Ray, Egon, and Winston, they realized that the slime flow had headed towards the museum. You've heard right, the same art museum they just left from earlier that morning, and where Dana works. Back at the restaurant, Winston, Egon, and Ray had just told Peter and Dana about what had happened, and that the slime flow was underneath the art museum where they just left from moments ago. When Dana had heard about it, she was in shock. So, after the restaurant manager got upset with Ray, Egon, and Winston and called the police on them, well, on the way out, that's when Ray told Peter they had to see the mayor Lenny and to talk to him about it, and so the four of them left. So long story short, back with Dana after having dinner with Peter, she went to see Janine and Louis and find out how her son Oscar is. Well, according to Janine, she just told Dana that Oscar's doing fine. So long story short, Dana went to the bedroom to check on Oscar, while Louis and Janine had both agreed that they shouldn't be by themselves, both Dana and Oscar, so they decided to stay a while longer. So meanwhile at the Gracie Mansion, long story short, there's Lenny, who saw the Ghostbusters, but Lenny's not alone because also there was Jack. So when Lenny agrees to give the Ghostbusters a couple of minutes, so Ray went first to speak in his case to say it's a pleasure to see you again, and about 50% of New Yorkers have voted for him, although Lenny is glad to hear it. But now here comes the bad news. According to Ray, there's a slime problem this time and it must be dealt with immediately. But Jack just kind of scoffs at it and dismissed it. So Ray went further to explain to Lenny that if something isn't done fast, then New York's in serious trouble, but Jack again dismisses it. Before Lenny can head off, he then told the Ghostbusters this case that being treated like dirt is every New Yorker's given right, and so he left. So that leaves the Ghostbusters alone with Jack, who's Mayor's assistant, to discuss the further situation to the press. But Jack just told them that there's a better suggestion to handle it. So guess what he did? In Jack's request, he has the Ghostbusters committed to the Parkview Hospital instead. So meanwhile back at the museum when Vigo again asks Youngs to bring him a child, Well, although Janusz agrees, but under one condition, if he can have Dana for himself. So after discussing about it, that's when Vigo agrees. So back at Peter's apartment, Janine, Lewis, and Dana were watching TV. Dana was hoping that Peter should be back soon. Well, back in Peter's bedroom, something or someone just opened a window. So Dana went to the bedroom to see if her son was there, but only to find out that Oscar is missing. So when Dana found out what happened with Oscar, that's what the trio saw was unbelievable. A ghost nanny with a carriage. And he just took Oscar from the ledge upstairs in the window. So Dana knew what to do. So there's only one place left to go, the museum where she works at. Back with the Ghostbusters, meanwhile they're still stuck in the psych ward. And back with Dana, she took a taxi to the art museum. So finally she arrives there. So when she approached the restoration department, she not only saw that her son's okay, but she also saw a youngish who approached her. But back with Dana, long story short, she was about to take her child and leave, but unfortunately some kind of force wouldn't allow it to happen. Things are looking bad, and if things weren't bad enough, meanwhile at the police station, long story short, they were swamped with 3,000 calls since midnight to say that there were ghosts all over the place. The very next morning, at the mayor's office, that's when Jack wanted to know from Lenny what is going on out there. Well, Jack's saying that they're doing everything they could. And after Jack had pleaded the case to Lenny that there must be another way, that's when Lenny was asking him where the Ghostbusters are. And that's when, by accident, Jack had just let slip that just the night before he had the Ghostbusters committed. When Lenny had learned about it, and because Jack wanted to protect his interests, and the Ghostbusters were going to tell the press about it, so that's when, by surprise, Lenny just fires Jack on the spot, and then later got escorted out. Meanwhile, in the psych ward, luckily for Lewis, after talking to his cousin, though it's confirmed that he did, he got the Ghostbusters released, so now all they had to do is get to the museum and fast. So finally, after the Ghostbusters were released thanks to Lewis, they had arrived at the museum. So long story short, now that the Ghostbusters had arrived at the museum, all they had to do was just get themselves in. Well, they used Plan A first by using their proton packs. But when that didn't work, that's when they had discussed a Plan B. And what was Plan B? Well, according to Egon, they needed something they can get behind the whole city of New York. Why, the Statue of Liberty, of course. So the Ghostbusters head to Liberty Island. So now inside the Statue of Liberty, what did Ray and Winston do? Well, with a little help from the slime blowers and some positive charged slime, all they need is to get the Statue of Liberty to life, and with a little bit of some higher and higher, and it actually worked. It was crazy, but it worked. So long story short, back at Ghostbusters HQ, there's Janine suing up Lewis, and then after that he heads off. So long story short, back with Lewis who just left headquarters moments ago, he catches the bus to the museum with a little help from Slimer the bus driver, of course. Long story short, back at the museum is now 4 minutes to midnight, at 11:56 of course. But guess who decided to show up at the last minute? It's the Ghostbusters and the Statue of Liberty. So back with Dana, she, luckily for her, snatches baby Oscar in the nick of time. Long story short, back outside of the museum, Lady Liberty just smashed the glass roof of the museum. So, after the Ghostbusters with the little help from the ropes go inside and confront with Janusz. But then, long story short, thanks to the possibly charged slime, they managed just to slime him, but luckily he'll be fine. But then, long story short, something from out of nowhere just tied up Dana. Luckily for Peter, he found a place to hide for little Oscar while he tries to go and help Dana. So back with Bingo, he set out of the painting, and that's when the Ghostbusters used the proton packs on him, but that didn't work. So long story short, things are looking bad. That was until when Bingo was about to merge with young Oscar, people were singing outside, and that weakens him. The song, by the way, is called All In Sign. So back outside, Lewis had made it to the museum. So long story short, back inside the museum after Vigo got weakened by the singing from the people outside, luckily for Dana she catches Oscar when she did, and Vigo went back into the painting. So long story short, thanks to the possibly charged slamming a little bit of proton power on the way by the Ghostbusters, Vigo is finally defeated, while outside, well, Louis became a hero too because he helped out on the way. Now that Vigo's defeated back with Ray, he's back to normal. Peter reunites with Dana and of course little Oscar. As for Jonas, well, he's back to his normal self again. As the film comes to an end, before leaving the museum, what the Ghostbusters saw was unbelievable. A brand new painting, and it doesn't have Vigo in it anymore. And even better, after leaving the museum, everybody in New York had praised the Ghostbusters because, yes, you've heard right, just like they did in the first movie, they became heroes once again. And of course, here's something else that's even more better. As for the Statue of Liberty, it returned back to its humble home on Liberty Island.